Do you still consider yourself a conservative?
Well, I've never joined the Conservative Party of Canada. I think Joe Clark expressed it that he didn't leave the party left him. I'm sorry, I have no time for climate deniers, and anybody, who is trying to pussyfoot around it. It's a serious, serious issue, and we need to attack it. And carbon taxes are eminently sensible.
Kim Campbell was first elected to Parliament in 1988 as a progressive Conservative MP for Vancouver Centre.
I'm an unconventional politician, and you guys are going to have to get used to me.
She rose to several cabinet positions in Brian Mulroney's government. In 1993, when Mulroney retired from politics, Campbell won the leadership on the second ballot over Jean Charest.
I, Kim Campbell.
And she became Canada's first female Prime Minister. But her time as Prime Minister was short-lived, just 4 months. In the next election, Jean Chrétien's Liberals routed the Progressive Conservatives in a landslide victory. Campbell lost her own seat and stepped down as leader 7 weeks later.
Gee, I'm glad I didn't sell my car.
Campbell has been busy since leaving politics. She works with many international organizations focused on democracy, leadership, and international policy. She was in Ottawa for an event with other female First Ministers, none of whom won a second term. Just down the street from Parliament Hill is the historic Fairmont Chateau Laurier. Tucked inside its Gothic walls is Wilford's. That's where we sat down with the Right Honourable Kim Campbell. Hello there, Ms. Campbell. Great to have you.
Thank you.
I appreciate you making the time for us today.
You got to eat.
We do got to eat, that's true. Do you think more than 2 decades later that you would still be the only female Prime Minister this country's ever seen?
No, I didn't. To be a First Minister, and to be Prime Minister, you have to be leader of a party that can form a government. And so those 3 parties would really be the Liberals, the PCs and their successor, the Conservative Party, and the NDP. Certainly at least 12 leadership changes among those 3 parties since I've been out of office, and none of them has elected a leader. Elected a woman as their leader.
Very nice.
Sorry, Ms. Campbell. How are you?
I'm very well, thank you.
Is here for you?
I think I'm just going to have the apple walnut salad. That sounds very good.
I'll have the summer beans. I'm ready.
beans?
Yeah,
Lovely.
thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks a
lovely.
lot. Appreciate it. So, when you think about that, two sort of separate questions. Why do you think that is, and how does it make you feel?
Well, I think what the problem is, first of all, if a party can form a government, it's very attractive to somebody to want to lead it. So the fight for the leadership is a tough one. It's a tough campaign. Women have to have an opportunity to build their credibility. So having women serve in cabinet and have that kind of experience, because women always need to have more experience than men. I mean, that's just the double standard. I think the barriers, the same thing with having candidates. The voters have made it clear they will elect women. Once you're nominated, if you're a woman, you have as much likelihood of being elected as a man. All things considered, whether this is a good seat for your party or not.
So do you think the problem is in politics then and not in the public?
No, I think it's in politics.
Huh.
Yeah, I think within the parties, I think it's harder for women to break through because those are the people who decide who their leader's going to be. I was elected at a convention and I campaigned across the country. It was like in a presidential primary in a way, but it was still within my party that the choice was made, not a broad general election. So those are the things that really have to change, and people have to see women as leaders. So the more people can see women doing these things, the more normalized it becomes.
Are you worried that, we won't live to see another woman as Prime Minister in this country, given that it has been more than 2 decades since you were there?
We could have a sudden change. You just never know. At the moment, the leadership of the parties looks, reasonably stable, but, a week is an eternity in politics, so you never know.
Let me ask you a bit more widely speaking as we head into the federal election. I watch your tweets. We all kind of look at what you tweet, what you retweet. Do you still consider yourself a conservative?
Well, I've never joined the Conservative Party of Canada. I think Joe Clark expressed it that he didn't leave the party left him. It is not the Progressive Conservative Party. And, our party was the party of the Acid Rain Treaty, the Montreal Protocol. I'm sorry, I have no time for climate deniers, and anybody, who is trying to pussyfoot around it. It's a serious, serious issue, and we need to attack it. I'm not going to live to see the worst of it, but that's not the point. The point is we owe to the future generations and the young people of today to address this issue. So
do you
a party
mean,
that's weak on that is not.
Do you think that the Conservative Party is weak on that?
Well, yeah, I do. You know, they pussyfoot around. They don't really come out and say what they, commit themselves to dealing with it. And, they produced a plan that has no targets. It's really a sop, I think. So, I've been very interested in what are the devices that are available to governments to help regulate emissions. And carbon taxes are eminently sensible, and particularly when you have a carbon tax, which is where there are rebates, it still affects how people behave, but it keeps it from being punitive for lower income people or people who rely on their cars, for example, for their work.
Why do you think the messaging, though, that is in opposition to the carbon tax, and we've heard it at the provincial level and at the federal level, appears, at least in some of the provincial cases, to resonate?
Because if you say this is a job-killing tax, the average person isn't an economist. The average person doesn't understand that that's absolutely wrong, and that in fact, to the extent that the government will get some revenues, a lot of them are going back. It's designed to change behavior. But what you need are the incentives for people to use alternate energies.
Is there a political party that you would align yourself with now?
Well, I kind of wait and see what's happening on election day.
Yeah.
And incidentally, there are a lot of people in the Conservative Party that I like very much. So, I mean, there are a lot of good people. But, if certain issues are not taken seriously, I can't, it's too late now. We don't have time to hope for people. And if they're saying things because they're playing to a recalcitrant base and in theory they'll do differently after that, sorry, that's too much of a risk.
I want to also ask you about another big story that occurred, that your name came up kind of in the middle of all of it, and that is the SNC Lavalin story. There was a point in time in which your name was invoked about the Milgard case, essentially. Ms. Wilson-Raybould said that she had met with you and that you denied the characterization. When you met, what happened? What can you tell us?
Well, she just asked me if Brian Mulroney had ever tried to interfere. And it's interesting because I saw what he'd written in his book, which was not true, but even he doesn't claim that he told me what to do. And he never did. But he certainly never, ever suggested how I should find in the case or what decision I should make. But what he did say was when Mrs. Milgard blindsided me, I went to speak in Winnipeg, and she appeared with TV cameras and stuff. And I was very uncomfortable because I wasn't sure under the terms of the statute that I was dealing with that I was even, allowed to talk to her, that it might compromise things in some way. And I just said to her, if you want your son to have a fair hearing, you can't talk to me. And she later apologized. She realized it was, it was a stunt that wasn't very helpful. But Brian Mulroney was concerned that I looked bad. He said, that was a lawyer's response, not a politician's response. And I said, well, sorry, I was wearing a different hat.
It's interesting that you use that description because that's essentially at the heart of what the whole story was about, basically. And the argument put forth by Ms. Wilson-Raybould was, I was wearing that hat at that time. Were you convinced by that?
But
what she was saying, or do you?
Oh, no question. But the point was that she wanted to know whether, I had that same experience, and the answer was no.
What do you think of the experience she went through?
I don't want to comment on that.
No?
Yeah, but I think the whole thing is kind of tragic because both she and Jane Philpott are liberals. They're not interested in joining any other party. Right. It's what they believe in, and I think it's really kind of sad.
You have not hidden your feelings about Mr. Trump at all. What is it about him? What is it about what's going on that has compelled you to sort of take a stand publicly?
I'm a passionate advocate for democracy and the rule of law. And I feel many of the things that I value most highly are under threat. And that worries me. I'm a former Soviet specialist. So a leader of the world's greatest democracy who plays footsie with Vladimir Putin and can't bring himself to criticize him, can't bring himself to acknowledge, even though the FBI and others have made it clear that the Russians interfered in the American election. That worries me. That's not peaceful coexistence. That's something much more. And I am frightened, and I'm not the only one. There are many people who are committed to I've spent a lot of my life since I was out of politics working around the world on democracy promotion and working with people in countries who are trying to create democracy, which is very difficult. You know, we are so lucky. You know, and I served at 3 levels of government in Canada. And it was kind of like a school of how democracies work, which doesn't mean it's perfect. But the great thing about democracies is you can correct errors. You know, we're not perfect, we're just people. But we have the rule of law, and we expect that to apply to the people who govern us.
From a Canadian perspective, though, you're one of the few people in this country who knows what it's like to be in the Prime Minister's shoes now. Do you ever think about what it would be like to navigate that relationship?
Well, I don't envy him, you know, like, oh, I'd like to do that. I mean, I think it's very difficult, and I think my observation is he's handled it, you know, as well as possibly could be. But it's very difficult to deal with somebody who is erratic. I guess I'm always an optimist because, you know, it means I get a little bit of sleep at night. And I do believe that there's enormous result. Well, if you look at it this way, first of all, Hillary Clinton did win the popular vote, which means that, first of all, over 65 million Americans were prepared to cast their ballot for a woman for president, even with all the stuff that had been said about her, even with all of the attacks. That, I think, is very interesting. You have to hang on to that. You have to hang on to the fact that the midterm elections really were a blue wave, even though it took a long time for the pundits to acknowledge that, because there were some vote counts that took a while to establish that the Democrats had won certainty. So there was a pushback by the electorate. So there are signs that the American democracy is working.
Junior Television Club, which is a CBC TV show you appeared on in 1957, or Real Time with Bill Maher?
Junior TV Club, because I got to interview Alberta Slim and his elephant, and you know I like elephants.
We do know you like elephants. Cello, piano, or guitar?
Cello if I could, piano because I can. I mean, I can play the cello, but I play the piano better than I play the cello, alas. UBC
or LSE?
LSE, in a way, because when I lived in London, I could spend every spare penny I had going to the theater. UBC I love, I mean, it's in my home.
And Vancouver or Paris?
Well, this may sound strange. I think Vancouver. Yeah, I'm a Vancouver girl. Still have me webbed toes. I love Paris too, but Vancouver's home, and I really feel great kinship there.
All right. Well, thank you very much for spending some time with us today, Ms. Campbell. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Vashi Capellos, host of Power in Politics. See more of our show by subscribing to the CBC News channel or click the link for another video. Thanks for watching.